Hey everybody, it's William Holland here for another episode of the Money Tree Real Estate Investor Podcast. Today I've got a special guest, Justin. I'll go ahead and let you introduce yourself, man.
Yeah, no, appreciate it. Justin Kiehne here, Vice President of Operations, Investment Advisor at Fortitude Investment Group. Myself and a business partner manage our Southeast office for Fortitude, which is a national, private wealth management company with a focus on real estate. Specialty in the 1031 exchange, qualified opportunity zone investing, pretty much anything that is tax advantaged, tax deferred in the real estate investment space. I do have, before I hand it back to you here, I do have a disclosure that I have to read because I am a licensed financial advisor. So bear with us, folks, and we'll get to the good stuff. So anything that I say is for informational purposes only, does not constitute as individual investment advice, and should not be relied upon as tax or legal advice. You'll hear me say that a lot. Please consult the appropriate professionals regarding your individual circumstance. Investments in real estate may carry risk. DSTs, those are Delaware statutory trusts, are speculative, illiquid, and carry a high degree of risk, including the potential loss of the entire investment. Investors should read the risk section of any PPM for full disclosure of risks, and then potential cash flows, returns, appreciation are not guaranteed and could be lower than anticipated. Securities, though we are not talking about specific offerings today, securities are offered through Concord Investment Services, LLC, member FINRA SIPC, and Fortitude Investment Group, which is my organization, is independent of Concord. So with that fun stuff out of the way, William, I'll give it back to you.
Perfect. Awesome, Justin. Yeah, thank you for just sharing that, man. You're the first guest that we've had that's licensed, so it's pretty cool.
I'm happy to be the first, right? You never forget your first.
Yes, sir. So we have similar backgrounds. As we talked about beforehand, I studied mechanical engineering. You studied engineering as well. I'd love to hear a bit of your story and how you got into financial advising and kind of real estate investing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, so unfortunately, background in engineering, right? And Will knows this. Means you think a certain way, you have a certain academic training, can be a blessing and a curse sometimes, right? You want to think things through, be very analytical. Personally, that can occasionally fall into paralysis by analysis, but we try to stay away from that. But yeah, no, my background, I was originally in college, I was in engineering, transferred schools a couple of times. I ended up studying physics in undergrad. I went to the University of Florida originally to pursue a PhD in aerospace engineering. I joined a research lab there. We were doing research on what we call electromechanical systems, essentially small sensors for use by like the Air Force, for example. I was there a couple of years in Gainesville, had a good time. The Gators weren't any good at football, unfortunately. But I was there a couple of years. I realized, you know what, I don't know if this is for me. So I got a master's degree, and I kind of went on my merry way, kind of put the PhD to rest. But I worked in engineering for a couple of years after that, worked for a company that was building gas turbine engines, think jet engines, think, power generation, electricity generation. Did that for a few years and had the same feeling. I wasn't loving it. I didn't love the idea of, you're paid a good salary, good W-2 wage. But at the end of the day, you're high priced labor. You're trading time for money. And that was made abundantly clear to me, at least, by, tracking hours for billables, right? By the 10th of an hour, right? 6 minutes, you're tracking 6 minutes, 6-minute increments. So I had been looking for something that was a little bit more entrepreneurial, a little bit more people oriented, a little bit more sales oriented, but still technical, given my background. And kind of a shorten the story, I met the one of the founding partners at Fortitude Investment Group at the gym. I call myself a recreational powerlifter, so I'm there, 6 a.m. most mornings. You get to know the same people, right?
Sure,
it's
yeah,
kind of the
you build
same.
those relationships.
Yeah, yeah. And so I got to know them, and I was looking for something they were looking to grow. And now myself and a business partner manage our Florida office for Fortitude. And we do a lot of business in the 1031 exchange space. So it's been fun. It's not, no longer trading time for money. I think that's what a lot of people are looking for when they get into the real estate investing. But it's, real estate can be technical enough that, keeps kind of the intellectual piece of the brain engaged, and then it's, Will, you and I were talking about it, right? It's former athletes. Real estate can be a team sport, which is a lot of fun as well. So that's kind of where we are today.
That's cool, man. Yeah. So before we dive in too deep into the real estate space, I always like to share people's just likes and dislikes and stuff. So we mentioned sports. So, what sports did you play growing up, man?
So I was heavy into lacrosse. So I grew up in Maryland, Annapolis, Maryland, a little bit of a Navy family, and lacrosse was pretty big. I know lacrosse is growing in Texas. It's growing here in Florida, where I am now. That was kind of the primary sport. A little bit of soccer, a little bit of basketball, but lacrosse was definitely the thing that I played through high school and college. And until a couple of years ago, was still getting out and playing in the occasional beer league game.
Okay, you had to retire finally, man. You made so much
I
money
had to hang them up.
in the
Yeah,
league.
yeah.
That's
They
funny.
kicked me out. You know what I mean? They couldn't keep up.
Too
That's a
good.
lie.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
funny. Well, okay, so you mentioned 1031 exchanges. That's a, very awesome topic. It's tax advantage for sure. Describe to us what that 1031 exchange means. What are some of the assets that you
Sure.
can use to sell? And then what are assets that you can transition into?
Sure. Yeah. So 1031 exchange refers to Section 1031 of the Internal Revenue Code, which is obviously U.S. tax code, um, and it's a mechanism that's been around in some form or fashion for around 100 years at this point, right? So it's not a loophole, not a gray area. It essentially allows you to sell real property, right, which is typically real estate, but sometimes can be mineral rights or air rights
Mhm.
or some interesting things, but typically just real estate. Um, sell investment real estate, and then following certain rules and timelines, reinvest that money into additional real estate, and it allows you to defer capital gains taxes and potentially defer depreciation recapture taxes as well. So potentially very powerful mechanism. It's one of the potential tax benefits available to real estate investors. It's one of the reasons that I think, or one of the reasons that I see that many of my clients have built wealth over the years, because every so often they can sell property at a profit, um, perform the 1031 exchange, potentially defer what could be a 6 or 7 figure tax liability, and sort of upgrade, level up, right? Sell single family rental to buy a duplex, sell a duplex to buy a small multifamily, sell that small multifamily to buy, commercial property, a strip center, sort of leveling up each time. And if you can keep more of your money working for you because you're deferring that tax liability each time you sell and reinvest, you're going to get there a little bit faster.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so one of the words that's thrown around a lot in the 1031 space is like kind.
Yep.
Obviously, you're very familiar with this space, but a lot of people maybe misunderstand what that means, and so if they sell a duplex, they think potentially they can only buy something that's kind of in that single family space. I got to hear an attorney really go into detail about the 1031 exchange, and he said like kind really means all the different things that you talked about. Like you can sell mineral rights and then go and buy multifamily property or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's a great point, Will. And it's a very common, as you said, misconception, right? Folks think that, as you said, right, if I sell industrial, I have to buy industrial. And that's not the case, right? It's really just investment property for investment property. So we often have dentists, attorneys, accountants who own property where they ran their business. Right? It doesn't even have to be rental property. They operated their own business out of that. And when they retire, when they sell the business, they can also sell the real estate, potentially perform that 1031 exchange. It is really interesting when you're in places like New York City or Miami, down in my neck of the woods here, um, because you get into conversations around air rights, right? Which is the areas above real estate, above buildings, and that potentially can be sold and purchased, right? If you're a developer building a tower, Will, I know that's your W-2, you know all about that. And those transactions can potentially lead to 1031 exchanges as well. It's
Wow.
really, really fascinating sometimes.
That's pretty sweet. Yeah, I know like Billionaires Row, I'm sure you've heard of that, in New York
Yep.
City. They buy all the air rights around that area so they can build higher. And that
Yep.
also means that the buildings around the area can't be built up as high as them anymore. So it makes them in a different class. It makes them
Stand out
pretty cool.
for sure. And so while you're talking air rights and New York City, um, Will, for you or for anybody else who's listening, check out a book that I read recently. It's called The New Kings of New York. It was published by The Real Deal. If you're familiar with The Real Deal website publication, right? Real estate website. Um, it's very cool. It's about developers that kind of made New York City what it is today. Um, guys like Stephen Ross, who's now the owner of the Dolphins, right, and the related companies. Kind of the things that happened in the late '80s, early '90s, up to the crash in '08. And they talk about some interesting strategies around buying up air rights. They can build their towers taller. You buy them from the building next door. Very interesting. So if you got a slot on your reading list, The New Kings of New York is worth a read.
That's pretty cool. Yeah. And, the building I got to build was 26 stories here in Uptown Dallas. So that's a
Yeah.
skyscraper here in Texas. May not be in New York City, but that's a skyscraper here. But what's crazy is it's pretty much within the air flight path of some of the airports around. And so that actually limits how high you can build in that area as well.
It's wild what goes into development. As a guy, I mean, Will, you know very well, which will serve you well as you get into investment and rehab and construction and development. Um, but it's wild what goes into limitations and the hurdles that have to be jumped and the hoops that have to be jumped through um, in development. It's never ceases to amaze me.
That's awesome. Yes, sir. So, what kind of person are you looking for to come to you?
Sure. So we do a lot of networking with um, folks in kind of the real estate industry. Anybody that's going to serve a real estate investor. Our avatar for clientele, first and foremost, accredited investors. Right, everything that we deal in for the most part is Regulation D securities. Either 506B or 506C, which means that you have to be accredited to invest. Right, that's $1 million net worth, not inclusive of your primary residence or meeting certain income thresholds. It's not my definition, obviously. That's the SEC. So that's first and foremost. But then kind of the profile for the folks that we serve as our clients. They're folks that are a little bit older, 50, 60, 70s plus. They've owned real estate for I'd say minimum 5 years. Long enough that it has appreciated significantly. They're at a point in their life where they're tired of actively managing that real estate, and they're looking to exit that property, sell that property, potentially defer the tax through the 1031 exchange, and then reinvest in some of the investment vehicles that we have access to that are essentially fractional real estate ownership, large institutional quality assets that are passive and provide the potential for diversification and growth as well, obviously. So that's kind of our avatar. And to get to them, I spend a lot of time talking to real estate brokers, both commercial and residential, real estate attorneys, real estate CPAs. Like I said, pretty much anybody that kind of serves the real estate investor clientele or the business owner clientele.
Mhm.
So it's just, it's like anything else. It's funny. It's just, it's building the network. It's making yourself known and articulating your value proposition, right? How can I add value to you, with my unique set of skills or my expertise?
Yeah, I love that. So, let's just walk through a scenario. So, as I mentioned, I own the home that I live in, and say 5 years from now, I decide to sell it, and I owe 200,000. I sell it for 500,000, and I only put 10% down or something like that. So I've got a few $100,000 of money that I'm gonna make off this deal. So I sell the property. How many days do I have to try to utilize the 1031 exchange?
Yeah, sure. So let's make it a little simpler though, because I know you live in your house and you also rent out your house, which that's one of those scenarios where I say, hey, talk to your CPA. because you're talking about Section 121 exclusion as well as Section 1031 exchange, right? Primary residence plus investment property. So that gets a little interesting for whoever your accountant is. So let's make it a little simpler. Let's say you bought a quad, right, for $500,000. Now it's worth $1 million, right? You sell the property. Your the closing date on your sale is what we call day zero, right, of the 1031 exchange. Exchangers then have 45 days to identify one or several potential replacement properties. And identification is really just providing a legal address. And then they have an additional 135 days, which is 180 days total, to actually purchase or close on those replacement properties, right? And so those are the timelines, right? Day zero is the sale, 45 to identify, an additional 135 to actually close, or the sooner of the date that you file your taxes, right? So if you're towards the end of the year and that 180 falls after April 15, you may have to file an extension, right? Otherwise, your window there can be potentially cut short. But that's kind of the timelines involved. You know, there are rules involved in terms of what you need to replace, you know, when you sell. So in that scenario, right, you bought for 500,000. It's appreciated over time, right? Let's call it 10 years. You bought it in 2010, right? You bought the dip. Here we are 10, 12 years later. You doubled your money. That's fantastic. So you go to sell for $1 million, right? That $500,000 in appreciation, that is taxable gain, right? And to keep it simple, we're ignoring depreciation recapture. You know, we're ignoring things like that. But that 500,000 is taxable gain at a 20% federal tax rate. You're looking at a six-figure, you know, $100,000 tax bill approximately, right? Don't quote me. I'm not a CPA. Consult your CPA. So performing the 1031 exchange allows you to defer that six-figure liability potentially. But you sell for $1 million, you have to purchase for at least $1 million on the replacement, right? We often get the question, well, I sold for $1 million, you know, 500,000 capital gain. My basis was 500, so I'm gonna take my basis home, I'm gonna pocket that, and I'm only gonna reinvest the gain. That's not the way it works, right? You have to reinvest the full sale amount, minimum. You can always increase the amount, but to get the full, you know, potentially get the full tax deferral, you gotta purchase for equal or greater than what you sold.
Makes a lot of sense. So are you able to take that full amount and leverage that, or do you have to buy a property in its entirety?
Yeah, absolutely. So in that scenario we just talked about, if you know, let's say you sell for $1 million, your basis is 500. Let's just say hypothetically at some point along the way you did a cash out refinance. So let's say a $500,000 mortgage on that $1 million property when you sell, right? So now you're getting into sort of the next level, which is not only do I have to sell for $1 million, buy for at least $1 million, but if I have a mortgage on the property that I'm selling, then I have to go get a new mortgage on the property that I'm purchasing, right? Of equal or greater to the mortgage on the property that I sold. And to your point, you can increase the mortgage, right? If you sell something that doesn't have a mortgage on it for $1 million and you want to go out and buy $2 million worth of real estate at a 50% loan to value, you can absolutely do that, right? So long as you're increasing the leverage or replacing leverage with additional cash, you shouldn't have a problem. But again, everybody's situation is different, and so obviously consult your tax advisor, consult your attorney before making any decisions. But if anybody's listening and has specific questions about their scenario, happy to be a resource. I'm sure Will can provide my contact, because again, it goes back to just providing value where you can.
Exactly. So I really appreciate that. I know the listeners are gonna really value all the stuff that we've talked about for the 1031 exchange. So the other thing that you mentioned earlier was the Delaware Statutory Trust. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and what that differs, how that differs?
Yeah, sure. So the Delaware Statutory Trust it's a legal entity. In 2004, in a private letter ruling, it was recognized as like-kind real estate in the 1031 exchange. So if you're curious about the Delaware Statutory Trust and you really want to nerd out, like a couple of former engineers, Google 2004-86 revenue proceedings, and you'll find that in Internal Revenue Code. And it's essentially fractional ownership larger, institutional quality real estate assets. Because it qualifies for the 1031 exchange, it can be a replacement property. And that's really, kind of the primary business that we're in, right? Folks sell property. They're of an age where they want to be a little bit more hands off. They want to spend a little more time with the grandkids or on the beach or on the golf course. So they sell a property, they perform that exchange, and they reinvest in something that could be, an Amazon distribution facility, hypothetically, or a 300 unit apartment complex, portfolio of self-storage properties, right? And that's one option in the 1031 exchange, just like it would be if you did a 1031 exchange and you purchased, another rental property, right? Another single family residence. The other kind of things that you see sometimes people look at as passive options in the exchange are triple net properties, right? Things like CVS and Walgreens, Tractor Supply, credit tenants with long-term leases. But, potential advantage to the DST is that minimums are much lower, as opposed to buying a CVS for $4 million. You can invest, $100,000 or $200,000 into maybe a portfolio of properties like that. So it really provides access to properties that maybe your exchanger with $400,000 or $500,000 in proceeds, couldn't otherwise access.
It's awesome. Yeah, that's very cool. So definitely appreciate that. Appreciate all the good advice that you've been able to share and your knowledge. What's some of the best advice that you've ever gotten?
Sure. So we were talking about this earlier. I would say there are two pieces that sort of feed on each other. The first one requires a little explaining, but it's really just, it is that simple. Whatever you're trying to accomplish, it just is that there's not a secret. You just have to get after it and put your nose down and do the work and continue to do the work, and if you want it bad enough, you will find a way. And that doesn't mean blindly, making phone calls, it doesn't mean doing something that's, clearly ineffective, but you just have to figure it out. It is that simple. And then the second piece that I would say that kind of feeds into that is, and this is actually an Alex Hormozy quote. Do something, if it's something you want to do it for a long enough period of time and with enough volume, enough reps, that it would be unreasonable for you to suck at what you're doing, right? And that goes back to first, right? It's just that simple. Put in the time, put in the reps, put in the energy, and you'll get to where you're going.
I like that a lot. One thing I'm learning is you got to enjoy the journey.
For sure.
I'm so focused on the destination, which is, hopefully going to be pretty cool. But it takes so long to get there. It's like, man, I want to enjoy the journey too.
Yeah. Otherwise you're never happy. You're always chasing something. It's funny. I think with a background in athletics, at least my experience is, you do, I think, learn to embrace the process. I think you learn to embrace, the off-season conditioning, right? And the wind sprints. I interviewed for a job years ago. It was it was an engineering sales company, manufacturing equipment sales. And one of the guys was in the interview was giving me a little bit of a hard time, and he essentially was saying, based on my resume, he was like, you're telling me you're going to enjoy cold calling, right? You're telling me you're going to enjoy people telling you no 50 times a day. And I was confused. I was like, no, I'm not going to enjoy that. But, just like you don't enjoy the conditioning, but you embrace it, right? You don't have to enjoy the no's, but you can embrace it, right? And you can enjoy the process as a whole. And I think, there's a lot of carryovers between athletics and success in business, because it's all about delaying gratification. It's all about embracing the journey, knowing that it's taking you somewhere.
Definitely, and I think that rolls right into the last topics. So I always want to end the episodes talking about maybe a lesson that you've learned in real estate, or a loss that you've experienced in real estate, or a mistake that somebody else has made that you'd like to share with the listeners. And finally, we want to end just on a really big highlight. What's your biggest win in real estate so far, or your biggest accomplishment, the thing that you're most proud of?
Yeah, sure. Um, so mistake or loss, that one comes to mind immediately. We were working a deal this year with some foreign investors out of the UK, very sort of high net worth, kind of multi-generational wealth. They were in the UK, then they were in Greece. We're dealing with 7, 8 hour time differences. We're trying to coordinate phone calls. They're in a 1031 exchange. So there are these tax deadlines that I mentioned, right? The 45 days. We got introduced to them kind of late in the game. And would have been my biggest, my biggest deal. Essentially, it would have been about 5 million in equity. And at the last second, they decided to go another route. They essentially decided to pay the 7 figure tax liability because they couldn't get comfortable in the short period of time. And that was tough. And I think the lesson I learned from that, and it was funny, right? They're in Greece. I'm in Florida. They're 7 hours ahead. Then I was in Seattle. They're still in Greece now. It's 10, 11 hours. Um, and it was about 2 weeks that we were working this thing, feverishly. And I think the lesson that I learned there is, you got to stay level. You can't get too high or too low. You can imagine you get a phone call from somebody that says, "Hey, I need to place $5 million in the next 2 weeks." You get pretty excited. Um, and then, that deal dies and comes back to life 4 or 5 times in those 2 weeks, right? Your blood pressure goes up a couple of points. Um, so it's really like, you want to work hard and get it done. But at the same time, you got to stay pretty even keeled. Can't get too high or too low, or you know the job will kill you.
Yeah.
So that was kind of a loss and a lesson combined into one.
For sure. And I think, all the working out and the running and all the exercise, like that's something that I found that's very helpful in working
Absolutely,
through those stressors.
absolutely, man. That's therapy, right?
It's definitely, man. So the last thing, brag on yourself for a second. Tell us your biggest accomplishment so far.
So myself and I would say two things. Our team last year did just shy of 25 million, um, primarily in the 1031 exchange space, which was fantastic. Very proud of that. Um, but the other thing that I think I'm equally as proud of is the growth that we've seen in the junior member of the team. So I mentioned it's myself and a business partner down here in Florida, and a little over a year ago at this point, we brought on a junior advisor, and just seeing how quickly he's hit the ground running, especially relative and how quickly he's gotten some deals closed and things like that. Obviously, with as part of the team, um, but relative to my experience getting started, and then my business partner's experience getting started, the new guy has leaps and bounds, kind of fast forwarded, and that's because of the platform that we were able to provide to him, and the teaching that he is receiving that I didn't necessarily receive when I was getting started. And so that's really, really cool, right? To be able to provide an opportunity for somebody that maybe wasn't provided to me, and to see them really take that and run with it. I would put that right up there with kind of, our production last year. For next year, I want to personally,
Hey, it's
you know, my,
2023, man. This year,
my
right?
my state, yeah, this year, my stated goal this year is 40 million, personally. I know my business partner has his own goals, and our junior guy does as well. um, but my stated goal this year is 40 million. So that's the next 365.
Let's go. That's
Absolutely.
Justin. Let's go, man. All right, Justin. Well, hey, thanks for joining us today. I really appreciate it. Just getting to hear your knowledge and shine the spotlight on you here at the end. I appreciate it, man.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate the opportunity, and happy hunting, right? Let's get it done. 2023.
Sir, let's close big deals.